Playing ESO nowadays is like the internet pre-ad blockers.
It's full of ads.
Want to rename your character? Click here to purchase a rename token. Want to change your race? Click here to purchase a token. There's a friggin' token for nearly every quality of life feature in this game. Want to stop dicking around with limited bag space? Purchase an odd number of crowns and buy your way around it. Want to create another character? Screw you, that bag space is only for one character. Hope you really like that Dragon Knight you created before you knew what the hell you were doing, chump. There's a million pop-ups for shit to buy, and all of it's a friggin' scam. It's like the 1990s internet, but without the charm of getting catfished in an HTML-based chat room by a 50-year-old man posing as a 20-year-old woman. This may sound like an aside and everything, but it needs to be said. Since when did it become normal to have to pay for shit that makes the game tolerable? When did we sink this low? And why do people defend this shit every chance they get, as if ZeniMax were some scrappy underground developer just trying to keep the lights on? Jump off their dick, Chaz. You're gonna have trouble keeping a poop inside you if you keep riding ZeniMax that hard. The anus is only so elastic, and yours is worn down like the waistband of a pair of underwear that won't stay up. People have been asking me for a while to review this game, and I honestly didn't want to do it because really, I actually play this game a lot, and I like it a lot, but I see a lot of problems that this game has, and I knew that if I did a video, I would be talking shit for a long time. Probably most of the video, and it would give people the wrong impression of how I feel about it. I liked it enough to max out 2 characters on 2 different platforms, but if you were to ask me what that experience was like, I couldn't really tell you about the specifics like the game's story and stuff like that. The game moves at a breakneck pace, so the specifics of the game are constantly flying past your face, and with every DLC that they release, a new mechanic gets released with it. So it makes it difficult to keep up with the game if you're not keeping up with the DLCs. I think that I, like many fans of the series, have been spoiled by the previous games, and this one just seems like a pale imitation, a cracked mirror, a half-erased tracing, a charcoal rubbing, an unfinished blowjob. This game started off having lost the identity of the games that came before it, and inspired it, but has slowly, over the years, come to adopt the things that both made the Elder Scrolls series great and what also holds it back in many ways. For instance, ESO started out as your typical MMO in that zones had a level associated with the mobs that spawned there, meaning that if you were level 10 in a level 20 area, you were going to get your ass handed to you. The grind was long, the grind was stupid, and people coming from other Bethesda games wanted to be able to explore anywhere, anytime they wanted, you know, like every Elder Scrolls game that had been previously released. So now, no matter your level, every enemy is the same challenge, which is to say, not really a challenge at all. This type of dynamic scaling is impressive for an online game, and it's a feature that is adopted from the level scaling of games like Oblivion, which is widely criticized for making the player feel like they're never getting stronger, which is, you know, kind of the whole point of level progression in an RPG. To make the player feel like they're getting stronger and able to take on new and escalating challenges. But in ESO, that scaling is taken to the extreme, where nothing feels like a challenge and nothing feels like a cakewalk. It's neutral. There's no peaks and valleys. It's just all valleys. It calls into question why the hell the game even has levels in the first place, aside from giving the player some artificial goalpost to chase. Just like Skyrim, there's only 3 stats: health, magicka, and stamina, and a bunch of derived stats that mostly go up depending on gear, and some of them go up per level automatically. So effectively, you only have 2 choices every level. What attribute do I level, and what skill do I level? The combat isn't challenging, and you don't need to min-max to be effective in combat. There's no wrong answers, which is great when it comes to player choice, but even the previous ES games had restrictions like major and minor skills in Morrowind. Restrictions are what inspire player creativity. There's not a whole lot of restricting going on in this game, and therefore, not a whole lot of creativity to be had. I don't have much to say about the level scaling because it doesn't innovate. It was necessary to evoke an Elder Scrolls feeling, but it doesn't add to the experience aside for allowing the freedom to go anywhere. But it also takes away a lot in terms of power progression and levels actually meaning something aside from number go up. The game shipped without any meaningful thievery system. A couple of years after its release, we got a theft system similar to games like Oblivion, where you could steal shit, but you can't sell shit unless it's to a fence. And what you do end up stealing is not really up to your skill, it's determined by RNG. And you don't get to steal anything really valuable, because if you did get to steal whatever you wanted, it would ruin the intended grind for gear that ZeniMax seems so fond of here. You can't steal an awesome endgame sword like you could in Morrowind, because the game wants you to grind to be able to craft it, or grind out a dungeon where it drops for however many hours it takes to kill 1,000 of the same goddamn mob. Then, put all of this together and package it with a daily limit on the amount of shit you can sell to a fence, and you'll begin to ask yourself, why the fuck is this feature in the game at all? The whole point of stealing becomes narrowed until it's no longer utilitarian and instead just becomes simple economics. How much money can I grind out, and how quickly can I grind it out? And are there other methods of grinding that are more efficient, and if so, why am I even doing this? Again, this makes the choice to steal more meaningless than it makes it meaningful by boiling the choice down to a small set of factors. It becomes a cost-benefit analysis as opposed to a creative way to solve a problem. It gives you something, and it takes away something else. This is a pattern with ESO, and it results in a very middle-of-the-road experience. It's neither challenging or easy. It's neither great or bad. It's aggressively okay. It has a lot of great ideas that are poorly implemented and overly balanced to the point of being boring. It makes the act of analyzing the game difficult because nothing stands out the way it would in a game that is just bad or a game that is really good. So to do this video, I started a new character. I named him Wally Paulnuts because the choice of naming my character isn't really up to me. It's up to whether or not some other asshole stole my name already. Then it came time to create my character. Now there's a lot of sliders in the character creation screen, and that looks like, at a glance, like it's going to have a lot of options. But upon closer examination, it really isn't that way. You have a triangle slider that smooths out or sharpens the features of your face, and a bunch of sliders for the size of specific parts of your face. Now that sounds cool, but for features like the nose, chin, and eyes, the slider doesn't really allow you to change those features significantly enough to veer away from looking like the default character model. I wanted to create a Dunmer version of Paulie Walnuts, but Paulie had a wide and bulbous nose, and unfortunately the character creator doesn't allow you to make the nose bigger to the point where it looks significantly different from the default nose, and the same thing goes for the eyes and the chin. You can't really create a character that looks different than every other Dunmer that's going to be running around the game world, which makes you not feel all that unique from the other players in the game. And again, this limits player creativity. Then it came time to pick my class, and normally I would pick a mage. I love mages in Elder Scrolls games because you're able to make your own spells from a list of spell effects. But then I remembered, your spells are not something dynamic like in the other games where you purchase a spell from a vendor and it does something crazy like make you jump higher, or levitate, or throw a fireball that explodes in both fire, ice, and lightning AoE damage. No. In ESO, you purchase your skills with skill points awarded to you for finding certain items in the environment, finishing certain tasks, or every time you level up. So there are a set small amount of spells you could purchase from, and those spells are the same for every player playing that class or using that weapon type. So instead of a mage being this really creative experience where everyone is using some permutation of a spell that is different from one another, basically everyone is using the same shit, especially when you get to the end game. It's another way in which this game takes away creativity to adhere slavishly to an MMO design trope. It sounds like I'm overly criticizing the game for being an MMO, but this game does actually do some interesting things that are unique to this game alone, but that design creativity does not carry over to the more traditional aspects of MMO design. So I pick a melee class because I'm a very basic bitch in that way. If spells don't interest me, then I'd much rather bonk people on the head with a heavy object. I picked a Dragon Knight because I had already leveled a Templar, and to be honest, I didn't really give the idea much thought because classes don't really matter all that much. Okay, I guess that's not really true. Your class matters insofar as it determines what class-specific trees you get access to. So if I wanted to be a stealthy character, I'd go with a Nightblade because they get access to stealthy shit in their class tree. But all classes can sneak and be viable thieves. The reason I say that classes don't matter is not because that's really a true statement. They do matter. Dragon Knights are better tanks, for example, than a sorcerer because their kit is outfitted with skills that help them do the job a little bit better. But a sorcerer could wear heavy armor and tank if they really wanted to because every class can self-heal, every class can do damage, and every class can do support. It's just a matter of degrees, really. Some classes do a better job of certain roles than others do. There's a lot that I like about this system, and then there's things I hate about it. For instance, I love that class doesn't matter as much because every class can do everything. That means there's much less emphasis when doing a dungeon on certain group compositions, at least in the regular dungeons. Not to mention you don't get locked into a specific role just because you pick the specific class. Like, it's more open that way, and I kind of like that. It gives you a lot more freedom when you pick a class and halfway through leveling that class, you're like, you know what, I really don't like this role that I'm locked into. I wish I could make it into a different role, and this system really allows you to do that midstream, and that's pretty nice. We'll talk more about veteran dungeons later. It seems like, in this system, people bitch a lot less about your build not being optimized than they do in a game where that kind of thing is really important. I also love the fact that there is a degree of freedom in the design of your character, and that kind of freedom leads to creativity, which I'm a fan of, as I said before. It may sound like I'm contradicting myself. What I mean is, the way you mix and match those skills is where you can get creative. And that's the difference between this and a mainline Elder Scrolls game. On the other hand, I hate it because there's no point, for instance, in being a healer, which is usually my favorite class to play. In fact, there's not a whole lot of point in specializing in anything unless you're doing some hardcore dungeons or PvP. In the over 300 hours that I've put into this game on both console and PC, build optimization has never come up like it does in a game like WoW, for instance. In that game, I spent countless hours grinding for the right gear so I could do dungeons more effectively, and I felt rewarded for doing so because if you don't do that, some of these dungeons at higher levels just aren't possible for you. Dungeons in ESO, at least on normal difficulty, aren't really like that. And I guess that's a good thing because it includes more players into the activity than it would otherwise, but on the other hand, it doesn't feel like an accomplishment when you beat a dungeon, because anyone with any party composition could have beaten that dungeon. You're not special. So if you, for instance, get a bad healer on your team, your DPS can still just spam his own AoE heal and do the same thing that your healer's doing and probably do it better. It's like, I'm conflicted about it because on one hand, it's better, obviously, because anybody can heal, which means if you get a lame healer, you're good to go. But on the other hand, as a healer, You don't really get the recognition that you would get in another game for doing good heals because, like I said, everyone can heal. So it sort of waters down the importance of certain class roles. After character creation, you're taken to a jail cell. Just like every Elder Scrolls game that came before it, you're a prisoner of some sort, thrust into the middle of an ongoing conflict. Here, we're met by an Aldmeri woman, and I just want to say something about how the characters look in this game as compared to previous titles. Every single female in this game, regardless of race, is totally fuckable. Altmer legitimately used to look like aliens. Like they were seriously otherworldly in Skyrim and Morrowind, but here, well, they all just kind of look like all the other races. Same with the men. They made all the races look like supermodels for some reason, and I honestly don't know why you would forego the unique look that they had for this arguably less unique version in this game.
There you are. On your feet. I know magical translocation can really upset the stomach. Just take a moment and get your bearings, all right?
We're greeted by the Aldmeri lady and told that we've been teleported to the Isle of Belfiera. Sorry. What was her reason for doing this, you ask? Well, apparently she didn't do it. A portal teleported you and a Daedra named Shayazel here, and while you were asleep, Norianwe put you in the prison cell just in case you woke up and started trying to kill everybody. She immediately trusts you once she realizes you're not foaming at the mouth and lets you out of the cell. And what happens next is a bunch of tutorials that teach you about the ins and outs of combat, stealth, and so on, and it's all over very quickly because you gotta hurry up and get to the next thing. And the whole way through this conveniently set up series of events, Norianwe is trying to impress upon you just how dangerous what you are about the face is.
I'm afraid we've reached the really scary bit. The Daedric creature responsible for all these portals waits just beyond that gate.
She builds up this mystique around the Daedra that we're about to fight, and she tells us the entire way that the Daedra is dangerous, and how afraid she is for what comes next, and when you finally get to the Daedra, this is what the fight ends up being like.
You, my meal. Wither and die. You cannot kill what cannot die.
Barely lost any health, barely needed to use tactics, just spam one skill until the enemy falls down. And this is an example of what the combat for about 99% of the single player experience is going to feel like. Run up to the enemy, spam your skill until the enemy falls over dead, rinse and repeat about 100,000 times until you're max level or until you give up out of boredom. And this is what the game does a lot of. It builds up some event or some creature that you're about to fight, and it builds them up like they're the bringer of the fucking apocalypse, only for you to defeat them in less than 15 seconds using only one ability. Once you defeat the snake bitch, you're led to a library with a bunch of portals leading to different parts of the continent. You're supposed to pick the place you want to start out in, and depending on your starting location, you'll be given a quest line. You don't know when you first start the game which quest line you need to do, and you especially don't know which town or region you want to explore first, so you'll likely pick one at random and hope for the best. I picked Stros Mackay because it sounded cool, and then I never saw this chick again, and all the stuff that we did together meant nothing. Like a one-night stand, but without a climax. I left this mission disappointed. After entering the portal, I was treated to a cutscene with several different voices narrating different parts of a story.
We submit to your will and call forth the chains of cold.
They're performing a ritual, preparing the way for a dark anchor.
Opening rift to oblivion.
It's worse than we thought. The plane melt has begun.
The portals reach from our side to theirs. That means there is a traitor.
Perhaps it was simply arrogance. Perhaps it was all part of his grand scheme.
Who can know the logic of a Daedric prince?
The cutscene reminds me of Oblivion because, well, it's kind of the same plot, is it not? And on top of being derivative, it's also weighed down by multiple storylines that are going on in the background of all of this, all of them competing for your attention, and none of them really rising to the occasion. But we'll get more into that later. When I emerged from the portal, I was in a port town, in what appeared to be a desert, and by following the marker for the closest main quest, I was led to this lady.
Look what the sea spat out, Lambor. Might be just what we need. You interested in some easy money?
Sure, I guess. I mean, a stranger comes up to me and asks me if I want to make some easy money. I usually say yes. I mean, I always regret my decision afterwards, but you know, $20 is $20.
I have a heist planned, a big one. Anyone who helps is going to be rich. But I need people who aren't local, who aren't in the pocket of Headman Bosek.
For all you know, I could be an agent of Bosek, freshly hired right off the boat. I mean, do you always proposition strangers with crimes you're about to commit? So I say yes because, well, I got no job, I got no money, I got nothing else going on, so like the lower rungs of society, it looks like it's time to do some crime. In order to do crime, however, we need to free some people from various forms of captivity. Aside from Naramo, who is just exploring some ancient Dwemer ruins, the others are being held captive in other parts of the level, and each of these missions has multiple phases. For instance, it's not enough that you rescue Jakarn from prison, he also wants you to help him get some shit he stored in a cave inhabited by goblins. But to even get to Jakarn, you have to engage this game's main loop. Normally, this loop would be explore, kill, loot, craft, and repeat. That's how the modern Bethesda games go. But this game wasn't made by Bethesda, it was made by ZeniMax. So while it does do that same main loop, it handles it in a special way. Let's start with exploration. You enter a dungeon, you go in a straight line, occasionally turning right down a hallway, then right down another hallway, then right again, until you either come to the end of the dungeon, then fight a boss, or pick up the item that you're there to retrieve, or you loop right back around to the beginning of the dungeon and exit it. Or, as is the case with some dungeons, you go in a straight line to the end of the dungeon, and then in a straight line back to the entrance. The dungeons don't really allow, for the most part, any form of meaningful exploration. Some rise from being a simple square or a simple hallway to being multiple squares connected by hallways. It's mostly just a series of left or right turns that loop in on itself, and only occasionally will there be a path to a dead end where a treasure chest will be, much like the dungeon design of a game like Final Fantasy II or IV, depending on what country you pretend to be from. Some of the dungeons become a little more complicated in the DLCs, but the vanilla content of this game seems to have been shitted out as quickly as possible in order to have a glut of content to satiate the ever-hungry content madness of MMO players. So that exploration loop, at least in dungeons, is right out the window. The only real exploration you do is overworld exploration, and sometimes that can be rewarding. You're looking for different waypoints, crafting materials, delves, which are this game's form of single-player dungeons, or sky shards, which give you skill points to spend, but for the most part, you aren't exploring to find cool shit. You're exploring to gain EXP, because the loot in this game ain't for shit, and the dungeon delving ain't for shit for reasons I went into before. So, exploration can be fun, but you can't approach it from the aspect of exploring leading to a reward. The reward is the exploration. Loot. Loot is all RNG, and the RNG is skewed heavily in favor of junk. There's a ton of useless junk in this game. Okay, well, not all of it's useless. Most of it is crafting supplies, and the thing about crafting supplies is that you're gonna get 1,000,000 of them, and they all take up space in what is a woefully limited inventory system. Your character gets 60 slots, and your bank account gets 60 as well. You can upgrade this space at a bag vendor, and the prices start out cheap, but the more space you buy, the more gold it costs. And all of that would be fine, honestly, because the game should have progression and bag space just like any MMO does. Progression can be fun. It's why most of us play RPGs. But here's the thing. The crafting materials will end up taking up most, if not all, of your bag space, no matter how much space you buy. And if you don't want it to do that by, say, having a materials bag, like just about any single player RPG, and for that matter, other MMORPGs might, you can do that, but you have to pay for ESO Plus, the monthly subscription service, and suddenly you never have to worry about bag space ever again. So like I said earlier, this game charges you for simple quality of life improvements every chance it gets. So the game has all these design decisions, which are stupid, time-consuming, and annoying for the player to deal with, and in order to get around those deficiencies, you have to pay your way around them. So in a way, the developers are encouraged to make their game worse to play in order to encourage you to spend money. It's an inverse law of single-player games. We buy single-player games because they're fun to play and not full of bullshit time wasters, and we give multiplayer games more money to make the experience less shitty. Maybe something is wrong with the way MMO games are designed. So what ends up happening is the game discourages you from looting most things because clearing out your inventory is a time-consuming process. Also, which I think is also by design, because well, every roadblock that the designer puts in your way encourages you to spend money to get around it. These systems aren't designed for fun, and that's the main problem I have with them. I will say one thing, the quests in this game are actually pretty good. They're not terrible. Although the writing, I don't know. I can't remember a single thing that happens in this game, and I've played through the entire thing like twice already, so I couldn't recall a single plot point to you, aside from the goblins all having the MMO symptom of standing in place and waiting for the main character to come and fight them. ESO is based off of a game series that has a lot of unique things going for it. From the way that you level up your character by using the skills, to the uniqueness of the races, even though they are technically based on pre-existing races that are in other games and media, they always felt unique. The Elder Scrolls games, at least early on, are games that tried to do something new with each release. But the Elder Scrolls Online does the exact opposite of that. It follows MMO design in a lot of places down to the smallest detail. And when it doesn't, it veers off into directions that I absolutely love and I absolutely fucking hate. For instance, enemies in dungeons are numerous and static, just like every other MMO I have ever played. And I've played a lot of them. The mobs are not living lives in ESO. They are simply there for the player to run in and wail on a few times with their stat stick and gain some EXP. Your primary motivation for being in a dungeon is to gain EXP, because it's not for the loot. As I previously explained, you are there to gain EXP through combat or through completing missions. The only time you go into a dungeon to get loot is when you're grinding out something that has a low percentage chance of dropping off a specific mob. And I don't think I've ever heard someone say, or ever heard myself say, God, I'm having so much fun killing hundreds of the same enemy over and over again, hoping that one item will drop on their corpse. So now we gotta talk about the combat. This also follows pretty slavishly to the MMO design tropes I was talking about. An MMO needs to be attractive for a large number of people in order to be successful, because MMOs are expensive to not only make, but to maintain and update through the years that the service is available. So, it would be reasonable to assume that if you want to appeal to the widest audience possible, your game needs to be accessible to the widest audience possible. So your content can't be like, I don't know, I'll pull a game out my ass, Elden Ring, right? You can't have Elden Ring style difficulty, or else you'll be pulling in Elden Ring numbers. At least that's what the consensus seems to be in the MMO community. But as we've seen with Elden Ring, you can be a difficult game and still sell a lot of copies. But that's the thing. MMOs aren't about copies sold. They're about keeping the players engaged with the content as long as possible to suck as much money out of their wallets as possible. And the thing is, many people quit playing games like Elden Ring once they run into a roadblock they can't overcome. That is a death knell for an online service game. So, given all this ranting, you might have already come to the conclusion that I'm about to say that ESO's combat is woefully lacking in a challenge department, and to that, I would respond with a ding ding, winner winner chicken dinner. 95% of the combat encounters in this game end within seconds of starting the fight. If you're a DPS character, which means that you can basically turn your brain off for most of the encounters and never be at risk of dying because the enemies, and I bullshit you not, the enemies die before they can even swing their weapon once. No bullshit. Once you fill up your hotbar with skills and get to about level 16, the enemies drop like flies. Then there's the enemies that have these adornments on their health bars. These guys are like elite mobs, and the more adornments they have on their health bar, the harder they are to kill. But as you can see from the footage I just played you, even at a low level, with only 2 skills to my name, this guy wasn't even a threat. I said before that MMO design is flawed, and this is what I mean by that. Because this is a sort of trope in MMOs at this point, and you might be thinking to yourself that this doesn't matter all that much. After all, if all the enemies were all challenging, imagine having to kill over 100,000 of them in the course of leveling a character. That would make the grind nearly intolerable, right? Especially if the enemies took a long time to kill, or if the player keeps dying in the course of killing mobs. And sure, if that's what I meant by making it difficult, I would agree with you, but there are many ways to make combat more challenging, and not all of those ways boil down to the enemy having more health or doing more damage. You actually see that kind of difficulty I'm talking about in some of the boss encounters in the dungeons, especially on vet difficulty. This game has a pretty interesting combat system for an MMO, that is. It has real-time combat just like in Skyrim, in that you hit a button and swing your sword, and if the sword makes contact with the enemy, you do damage. That's pretty unique as far as MMOs are concerned, especially in a genre that gets a lot of inspiration from old isometric real-time with pause combat systems. The fact that the combat is in real time and somewhat based on skill is what makes the combat fun to engage with, and is the reason, quite frankly, that I've put so many hours into the game as I have. The thing is, the game does nearly nothing with all that potential for at least 95% of the game's combat encounters, at least in the main story, and almost every side quest that isn't a dungeon. Your success or failure, most of the time, isn't dependent on hitting the block button at the right time or dodging out of the way of an attack, even though those mechanics exist in the game. Instead, most combat is over quicker depending on how quickly you can spam your most damaging ability. My problem, I guess, is not that the game is too easy, because if you want more difficult combat, you can do veteran dungeons. If you spend hours upon hours grinding out the gear, that is. My problem is the wasted potential of the combat. Forever, I have wanted to play an MMO that had real-time melee combat, and here I have it, in all its glory. And it is fun, but it isn't challenging, so therefore, it's not as fun as it could be. Remember when I said this game is all valleys and no peaks? This is what I meant by that. Builds in this game are interesting. See, in single player, just about any build you come up with will work, and in regular dungeons as well. If you could do some form of damage, you'll be able to coast through the content pretty easily. But if you want to do the real endgame content, the veteran dungeons, your build has to be very specific. And I mean super specific in a way that I honestly don't know how you could build an effective character without an encyclopedic knowledge of all the skills and gear in the game. I, in my infinite wisdom, decided that I wanted to play as a tank. Why a tank? Because I like to be in the shit whacking people with my big stick, and because tanks are always immediate pick for all dungeons. While DPS, the arguably funner way to play the game, takes upwards of 5 to 10 minutes to get into a dungeon with. So I made a decision. Because I wanted to play the veteran dungeons with my maxed out character and grind out the best gear and all that endgame stuff, I made a decision to respec into a tank role. So I went out, looked up a good tank build online, and respec my character to the specifications laid out in the build, which was quite a doozy because I needed skills from skill lines I didn't even know existed, like Assault and Undaunted, and I needed to be carrying around a destruction staff and level it up. A tank with a destruction staff. Not exactly intuitive. So I went out, grinding out all the necessary EXP to get the skills I needed to make the build work, and once I finally got the build together and I went out to do some, get this, solo content, I found that not only was the build kind of shit at solo content, but it took forever to kill shit because these builds are optimized for dungeons and group content, and not even close to useful in solo content. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. The general consensus in the community seems to be that in order to have a useful character in both solo and group, you need an armory. An armory is a quality of life feature that is locked behind, you guessed it, a laborious grind. What it does is allow you to create and build and store a second build and switch between the two at will. So while other games are out there giving away this shit for free like chumps, ESO is out there profiting off of quality of life features. First thing you need in order to get an armory is a house. The cheapest house in the game is 40,000 gold. There is a free house, but it is locked behind DLC, and there are other houses you can get for free through quests, but their space is pretty limited. I was level 50 with a level 90 champion before I even had 30,000 gold, and I spent all that money on upgrades in my bag space, so no house for me, which means no armory, which means I respec my character for no reason, and I was going to have to grind to respec back into DPS so that the single player content would once again be tolerable. So while the game does have great combat, which I really like, and engaging combat and harder levels of difficulty, greed gets in the way of a lot of my enjoyment and keeps me from playing the game the way I want to. And yes, I know you can grind out all this stuff and you don't have to buy it, I get it, yes, but the game heavily encourages all but people who have infinite amounts of time to indulge this fucking game while encouraging those with less time to, buy some crowns and skip the grind. And speaking of grind, let's talk about the real grind in this game. Now we come to the final part of the loop, and that's crafting. And this game has a pretty extensive crafting system, but this is a really big friggin' but. This game uses one of the most shitty mechanics to open up new crafting recipes that I have ever seen, and that's the research mechanic. See, to figure out how to build gear with simple magical abilities on it, you have to research them. You do this by sacrificing an item that has a magical ability you want on it, and after the research timer finishes, bam, you have now unlocked the ability to make that piece of gear. But first, you need to hope that item with the trait drops at some point, and that, frankly, can take a while, and the problem with this is compounded with the fact that your bag space is severely limited. You end up having to carry these items around with you until your research opens up, or store them in your bank, which, again, will likely drive you nuts or drive you to pay for more slots. Each piece of armor and each weapon type has a set of magical traits that can be researched, and you have to research the trait you want on each piece of armor to start crafting full sets of magical armor or weapons. The first trait for a single piece of armor that you research takes six whole real-world hours to finish. And there's over 9 traits per piece of armor, and over 120 styles of each armor piece to unlock. If it was just 6 hours to research each piece of armor and each trait, it would take you 432 hours to research everything you need to fully research every piece of armor and all of its styles. At least it would be if the research time didn't fucking double each time you research a trait in a given line. So that means to research all of the traits for a single piece of armor, it will take you, hold on to your fucking nuts, 128 days! Okay? Do you understand why I'm complaining about this? That's 128 days to research one piece of armor, all 9 traits. It would take you over 1,000 days to research every trait on every piece of armor, which means most, if not all of the player base would take several years to become a master blacksmith without spending money. And that's not even including the weapons and light and medium armor. That's just the heavy armor line. It's meant to keep you grinding forever. Now, there are skills that you can unlock to reduce the amount of time it takes to research stuff, as well as allows you to research more than one piece at a time. But that's only slightly better. You still have to wait several days, real, actual days of your life, for something as simple as unlocking a recipe. Now, wouldn't it be really bad if there was, say, an item that you could buy with real money that sped up or made the research times complete immediately? That would be really scummy if they did some shit like that, right? Well, yeah, of course they did that. You can go into the Crown store and buy a scroll that will make the research for all current items being researched complete instantly. But here's the really fucked up thing. You can't buy them directly. You can only buy them by buying crown crates. Someone did the math on this and determined it would cost you $2,000 of real goddamn money to research one line! One line! So there's no reasonable way to skip that grind. So people don't really strive to be master crafters. Well, I mean, I don't, but I know a few people who are trying to, but you can't reasonably do that in a game that makes you wait 32 days to research a single trait. Now, would you believe me if I told you that people defend this practice? Just look down in the comments of this video. There's bound to be at least someone down there defending this shit. So I have to ask you, did having to wait 128 days to research one item make you feel like you had a richer experience playing the game? If not, then why defend this shit if it actively makes the experience worse? Then there are the people who will say you only need to research the trait that you want on your armor, and that only takes 6 hours. Well, to that I gotta say, what about writs? What about having multiple builds for different activities? What if your goal in the game is to be a master crafter? Shouldn't you be allowed to achieve that goal without having to play the game for more hours than the game will actually exist for? Now, I could deal with one of these steps in the gameplay loop being a little weird, but all 4? Holy shit, no! Then we come to styles. Styles and motifs are what differentiate the look of each style of armor. You can only craft your racial style at first, and you have to learn the other styles from books that very rarely drop. I mean, I have been playing this game for a couple of years now, and I've only found one. So how do you learn basic styles? Wouldn't it be shitty if I told you that you could buy that? Yes, of course you can buy them. and the basic styles are fairly cheap. Fairly, he says without actually checking the conversion rate. Hang on a minute. Okay, I take that back. This shit is ridiculous. It costs you $5 to unlock the styles for one faction. That sounds like a good deal, but I haven't told you what the unique styles, you know, the ones you actually want, I haven't told you what those fuckers cost. Hang on to your nuts. They cost $40! $40 goddamn dollars for one style! 5,000 crowns for unlocking one of the 124 available. And like Fortnite, not all of these skins are available all the time. You ever wonder why that is? Like, wouldn't it make more sense to have all of your skins on sale all of the time? No. Oddly enough, you drive more sales more quickly when you only have the skins available on special events because of the fear of missing out, FOMO. If I don't get these skins right now, who knows when I'll be able to get them again, if ever. You might get them as drops in certain dungeons, maybe, but if you're looking to have a different look to your armor than the basic shit you start with, that journey is long, time-consuming, and completely up to RNG. And if you want to unlock them with money, you're gonna have to be spending quite a lot of money. I think, and I may not be right, but I think that this might be the most expensive that I have ever seen what amounts to a skin cost in a live service game. Granted, you get technically 3 skins. One light, one medium, one heavy armor version, but still $40? Are you out of your goddamn mind? Now, I don't want it to sound like there's no other way to unlock these things besides just like finding a motif book or anything. That's only for crafting. Like if you want to craft something other than the stuff that you start out with, you've got to find the books. But you can actually apply the styles after you've unlocked them by finding the gear laying about on the ground on dead bodies and then disassembling them at a bench or selling them, I think also unlocks them. So you can do that. And there's a really nice system too, where if you go into the style page on your character and hover over one specific style, it'll tell you where that style actually drops. That's really helpful, and I really like that system. What I don't like is how predatory this skin system is in this game. Okay, all right. So now that we looked at the loop and how it seems to fumble the bag at every step in the loop, and worse yet, fumble the bag on purpose, how does this game handle the thing that will probably matter to most people who are coming from the mainline Elder Scrolls game, the quests and the storyline? Well, let's look at that, shall we? So after I emerge from the tutorial, a stranger trusts me with a heist, and that heist turns into a quest to save and recruit an entire orc town for the war effort. Now, you start off one way, end up another way. When one storyline or quest ends, you end up into a completely different storyline that has nothing really to do with the previous storyline, even if the continuation of that storyline has the same characters from the previous storyline. It's as if the previous events never happened or don't have any impact on the events that are about to happen. These quests are like the Keurig cups of the storytelling environment, you know what I mean? They're single use, and once you're done with them, you throw them away and never think about them again. It is the prime example of and then storytelling. Like, right, there's 2 different types of storytelling, as far as I'm concerned. There's the type of storytelling that has no logical reason for why one plot thread leads into another, and there's another type of storytelling where there's a logical reason why each event in a storyline happens. It's the and then type of storytelling that is the former, and the latter is the because this happened type of storytelling. And this game definitely leans really heavily on the and then type of storytelling. So after this, I'm taken to a new town, and the first mission I get is to meet a guy in a place, and don't ask why, you should just be honored to receive the opportunity. So I head over to the waypoint marker and find that there is indeed a guy there, but he's been bound and gagged. And then I get hit over the head and I'm kidnapped. It's always a high elf, isn't it? Always a high elf. And this is when the actual main story of the game starts. And it is the main story that I want to talk about because, my God, it is all over the place. It starts off nice enough, granted. I wake up in yet another prison, which, talk about repeating plot points. And yet again, I am rescued by a totally fuckable lady named Lyris. We fight our way out of a place that is apparently oblivion, and there's a lot of environmental storytelling going on here. What the fuck? Wow. Cool. Guys holding a door shut, the sounds of shouting and battle coming from the outside. And then we meet the Prophet, a blind old man who shouts exposition and gives us missions.
Greetings, listener. Like you, I'm a prisoner in this place. You must rescue me, and I, in turn, must rescue you.
He's one of those men of mystery who can never just come right out and say whatever it is he's trying to say because it makes him more mysterious and fools people into believing that the story has more depth than it really does. And we're tasked with destroying a magical construct called the Sentinel so we can blind Molag Bal to our plan. So we run across the map, head up a mountain, kill some fodder mobs, and then whack the Sentinel.
Well played, friend. Marquez Beard, you are good in a fight.
Yeah. Or maybe they're just really bad in a fight. But we find out that after killing the eyes, Molag Bal can still see us.
Fool! You will never escape my realm.
And knows we're trying to free his prisoner. So he locks the door and taunts us. And this game does this a lot, okay? It'll say that one thing is going to happen if you do X, Y, and Z, and then you find out that that thing doesn't happen, and you start to wonder to yourself, is this supposed to be this way, or is it a plot hole, and ZeniMax just forgot to plug up the hole? You know what I mean? You'll be thinking this a lot in this game. So we have to recruit the help of someone who's the best voice actor in the game, or at least the voice actor with the most character in his voice, and that's Cadwell. And you might think, cool, we get to go on a journey to find... No, he's just behind this door that you were going to go into. Convenient, is it not?
Tell you what, I happen to know another way in. Much more of a scenic route. Rather a fun little jaunt, actually, full of traps and corpses and nasty beasties filling up the bits in between.
So, with the help of Cadwell, we managed to find yet another entrance to the prison through a series of tunnels, and it's here that we get our first chance, honestly, to use our lockpicking ability, and the mini-game that accompanies it, and I have to say, I really like this version of the minigame. It's more involved than the simple Skyrim version, and a little easier than the Oblivion minigame. It lies just perfectly in the middle of too much and too little engagement, and ends up feeling just right. So we head inside, kill a bunch more fodder enemies, dodge some traps, and we finally meet the Prophet face to face. Now, this is where I start to have big problems. See, Lyris says this.
There's a trick to opening the cell. The only way for a prisoner to leave is for another living soul to take their place. I need to swap places with the Prophet.
What? Okay, so what you're saying to me is Molag Bal, the Daedric Prince of the R word, you know which R word I'm talking about, the no-no word that YouTube won't let me say, Anyway, he's quite proud of his title. In fact, it was his wandering dick that caused vampirism in the Elder Scrolls. That's right, vampirism is a sexually transmitted disease. So anyway, in ESO he's called the Prince of Schemes, which is the first time that I've ever heard him called that, and apparently he's so good at scheming that he can tell what you're going to do before you do it. At least that's what they say. So this guy, who has all this foresight, was stupid enough to build a prison so weak that all you need to do is switch the bodies in it to open the lock. That is the dumbest shit that I have ever heard. Why would you design a lock to keep a specific person in a place and have the key to that lock be the body of a person that you don't have any interest in keeping? All right, this is just the start of this kind of shit, but we'll keep going. So anyway, Lyra switches herself with the Prophet, and we fuck off back to the realm of the living. Somehow. I mean, I guess we ride an anchor back to our plane of existence, which is just a fancy way of saying we took a portal, I guess. And the more important bit of info about all this stuff that's going on is that Molag Bal has our soul. And while he has our soul, we can't die. Okay. Doesn't really seem like a problem to me. So, why am I in a hurry to fix this problem again? But before that question can be answered, we have to have a boss battle, and the game makes you think that the boss battle is going to be super fucking rad, but it is, in fact, very lame. Okay.
Who thinks it can defy me? Feudal. Soon your world will be in my chains.
Okay. I'm gonna kill this guy, apparently. Oh no, never mind. Wow, that was difficult, man. Look at me. I'm sweating right now.
As I feared, we arrived in different locations. I am in a place with the smell of burning ash on a hot wind and the sounds of a distant battle.
We jump through the portal and are spit out into two different locations because the game wants us to engage with some side content to pad out that main story runtime. The Prophet even says as much before fucking off.
You must find your own path, but perhaps there is a reason for the place in which you find yourself. Explore, search for a cause to lend your hand. Join with others. You might even seek out those who rescued you from the sea. The choice is yours.
But the choice really isn't yours the first time you play the game, because if you want to continue doing the main story, you have to talk to that lady that fished you out of the water and do some missions for her until it leads you to the town where the Prophet has set up shop. And there are quests that are actually pretty good. At first, it's a pretty typical MMO mission. Find 3 people and ask them to get their asses home for some other task. But later on in the mission, we get to see what this game does best, and that is zone instancing. See, what happens is, after you progress the story here, an attack on the town happens, and because you can evacuate the town, an army shows up and sets fire to the entire place. This happens because you're placed into an instance of the town where no other players who might be in the town at the moment can see. That's how they are able to dynamically change towns due to events or the outcome of a choice that you made. It's one of those things that I was talking about earlier that really sets this game apart from other games in the same genre. The dynamics of the story and the world really help to set it apart from the crowd. Anyway, we ruin the town by letting it burn to the ground and run away like little bitches from an army that we, quite frankly, never see. Well, I guess we technically get to see some of it if you count fodder mobs sprinkled throughout in town as an army. We get on a boat and head to a place called Balfoyan off the coast of Morrowind. It's a colony for former Argonian slaves that live in huts that appear to be made out of mud. And if you wanna, you can buy one of these lovely mud huts for yourself and invite your friends over to pray to whatever god that you believe in that it never rains. We do a bunch of unrelated to the main story quests, lighting signal fires to warn people that an invasion is coming. And at some point, after grinding out all those missions, you end up on another boat about to head off to another random place, but this time it's the place you actually wanted to go. Or I should say, the boat drops you off near the place that you want to be, and you eventually, through following waypoints to the next mission, end up in the place that allows you to continue the main story mission. And that's sort of a theme in this game. You don't, as a new player, navigate in an intuitive way. It's a lot like Morrowind in that you're taking boats all over the place, heading to random places and hoping that you're about to go to the place that you need to be, because despite this game having a ton of fast travel points in the form of these way shrines that are dotted all over the map, where you need to go is often confusing, especially when a waypoint marker tells you to go to a dock and take a boat, but doesn't tell you which of the 5 locations the boat travels to is the place that you need to go to finish the mission. It doesn't happen often, but it happened enough that I thought that I might mention it. To top off the frustration, the waypoints for missions do not appear on the continent map view. You have to select a region, zoom down into it, and scan the map for waypoints. And if you don't see the one that you need, you back out and try the next region. If there's a better way to do this, I've never seen it, and I have over 300 hours in this game. Then after I wrote all this, I went online to confirm all this, and there were plenty of posts bitching about the same thing that I'm bitching about. Then one helpful soul posted that if you go into your journal and look at the active quest, you can hit an option to open up the quest on your map. I've spent this many hours in this game and never knew that. And it's a super important feature. Maybe that's my fault, but it feels like, to me, bad UX design. Anyway, eventually I end up at a place called Stone Falls, and waiting for me there at the docks is a vision of the Prophet.
There you are. Do not panic. Only you can see me. Come, we have to talk.
The Prophet tells me that he's found a safe place for us to discuss our political beliefs without getting spied on by the NSA, so I meet him in the Batcave, and he gives us our first mission, our first real mission in the storyline. We're going to attempt to free Lyris from her prison. But you might be asking yourself, golly, I thought in order to free her, we needed to exchange her for someone else. And you'd be right to ask that, but here's the thing. Molag Bal freed her from her prison so that she could make weapons for his army. So once again, this Daedric Prince of Schemes is going to have his well thought out plans fucked up by a level 13 some dude. This guy sucks at making plans. But before we go to rescue Lyris from a place where she is being likely tortured by a Daedric prince of sexual assault, it's super important that the Prophet shunts us up into his mind to show us a home movie he's made about his past. We walk through his mind like a museum, and he spends a whole lot of time explaining to us the backstory of the companions and all kinds of other stuff that we, frankly, don't really need to hear, considering the fact that Lyris is likely chained up to a wall with clamps on her nipples connected to car batteries. But I guess she can wait for later. Exposition is far more important. And as much as I complain about this type of storytelling, the way the story is told is kind of nice. You get to see the events play out instead of just being told about it, and it's pretty alright, though I tend to hate exposition dumps because I don't think they're always necessary to tell a story. Then we get to the Getting place, and Lyris is there just hanging out with a bunch of dudes who just seem to be standing around. I thought these assholes were supposed to be making weapons. Am I to believe that the Prince of Schemes is not only a bad schemer, but also a bad manager?
But you can't stay. You have to leave before they find you here.
I'm not leaving without you. We've got such a long and involved history. I just can't do it.
You don't understand. They've done something to me. I can't leave.
You find that G-spot and you're just like, I can't leave now. He's abusive to me, and he abuses me mentally and physically, but he knows where my G-spot is. I can't leave him. So Lyris says that her memories have been fragmented and spread throughout the foundry, and we journey through the foundry while she tells us about her daddy who never loved her.
This can't be. It looks like my childhood home in Skyrim. My parents' graves. My mother died in childbirth.
I don't care, Lyris. I don't know. Why am I learning the random history of these fucking people? Why is that important to the overall story of this fucking game?
Murdered by an old enemy.
This is what I hate about the story of this game. It's like I'm learning stories about these people I don't fucking care about.
I don't understand. Lyris was always a free spirit.
Hey, get it? Free spirit. She's a free spirit, get it? Haha! That's funny.
Is this true, child?
You were always so cold. So distant.
My God.
My mother died, giving me...
Gonna hear about your fucking daddy issues now? Jesus Christ.
I should never have been born.
Lyris, look at me. The blood of giants flows through my veins. Your mother was a Nord. I gave her my seed without thought for her safety. That's why she died. Not because of you, child. Because of me.
I thought you...
He shot a load inside her so hard that it blew her fucking brains out. Then we get another memory of a place where people treated her bad and hit her armor like they're a bunch of school children and not, you know, soldiers. And you search around finding all the pieces of her armor, and she suits up and grows a pair magically. Then we find her axe, and it's at this point that she feels much better, able to take on the world, except for the fact that whenever she hits someone, it barely does damage. Then we come to a vision of a half-naked man who is quickly whisked away. And the question for me is, why? Like, why would the god of schemes let us know that one of our companions is not only still alive, but he's also being held prisoner here? In what way does that benefit Molag Bal? If we never saw the image of Sai Sahan, we wouldn't know he's alive and in prison there, which means we wouldn't have come up with a plan to break him out, which means we wouldn't have found out where the ring MacGuffin is that leads to the amulet MacGuffin, which ends up being the undoing of the God of Schemes' plans. So why would they have this image of Sai Sahan, not his actual body, but a projection of him in this random room so that we can stumble onto it and realize that the key to our victory is being held in this prison? That makes no friggin' sense! There is no good reason to have this projected image of him in this room other than because we need to find out that he's being held here, and this was the easiest way to show us. There's absolutely no logical reason for the enemy to do this. So why is it here? I don't get it. So we head through the dungeon, come to a portal, and have a boss fight with a not beholder, and head back to the harborage to talk to the prophet. We let him know that Sai Sahan is being held, and the next mission, of course, is to break him free from his prison. But before we could do that, we have to wait for the prophet to catch his breath, because apparently he's wheezing from all that standing around watching us work that he's been doing. So I walk back to town, break down and sell off all the crap that I picked up along the way, and wouldn't you know it, as soon as I get to town, before I even had a chance to enter the gates, the prophet pops up and is like, "Hey, I'm ready now, get your ass over here." And he does this in between every main story mission. He tells you to get out of his house and let him think, only to tell you, "Psych, just kidding, walk all the way back to my cave, LOL.
There you are, Vestige.
God damn it.
We must speak.
No, not gonna do this right now. I'm gonna go do this. Fuck off with your main story bullshit. Then I collect my daily reward while in town, breaking down items at the crafting benches. And I want to take a moment to talk about the daily reward system. On the first week of the daily rewards, you're given loot crates. These loot crates have a small chance that drops things like pets, cosmetics, stuff like that. But what they mostly drop are poisons, potions, and scrolls of experience. The scrolls are great and provide a tangible reward that actually helps you, but the potions and poisons, I don't know if I'm convinced they're worth taking up space in a loot crate with, especially when the loot crates are this expensive. The way I see this situation is like this. A crown crate costs $4 per crate. You are almost guaranteed to have 3 out of your 4 items you receive in a crate be a consumable that will likely just take up space in your inventory, and only 1 chance to get an item that you actually want. And sometimes that 1 chance that you have to get an item you want, that shit can end up just being a duplicate, for which you get a pittance of crown gems for. You know what else you could get for $4? You can get these crafting motifs that are on sale, or you can get a cool mount. Then if you buy a whole pack of these crates, you can get 15 for $40. $40 for 15 chances to get a super low percentage chance to get an item you actually want. As you could tell, I absolutely hate the monetization model of this game. Don't buy loot crates. They're a waste of your money. You know what else you can get for $40? You can get a couple old DLCs or one of the new DLCs. You could get more content to explore, or you can blow your money on a digital equivalent of scratch-off lotto tickets. Don't fall for it, brothers and sisters. It's a scam. Back to the story. So I head back to the Prophet, and he sends me back to a town that I literally just came from in search of an agent of the Worm Cult. The cult that Mannimarco is the leader of. Mannimarco being the current big bad that we need to deal with. The Prophet tells me I need to track down this Worm Cult member and squeeze him for information, but to find him, I need to talk to 2 different witnesses that will then lead me to an underground base where the agent is hiding. And there's a skill that comes up, for me at least, for the first time. Now, sometimes in dialogue, there's an option to persuade or intimidate the character, and it does just what you think it does. It lets you skip certain steps in a quest. And in some rare occasions, actually opens up new options for interacting with NPCs, like for instance, using Intimidate to rob a roadside merchant. This is another one of those things that this game does that I haven't seen many other MMOs even attempt, and it's a really great feature. I really like it. So anyway, once I talk to the lizard beggar, a new waypoint opens up that leads me to the underground.
What is the meaning of this interruption? Why have you contacted me? This is Abner Tharn. The Master and I are very busy. This had better be important.
The dialogue options in this game are something else, man. I'll tell you what. They are certainly something. See, in basically 99% of the conversations in this game, you get 2 options for how to respond to an NPC. You can say goodbye in the middle of the conversation, or you can select the option that moves the dialogue forward, and when it's dumb, like the options above, you don't really have a choice. You have to pick the dumb option, which makes all of the characters you create, regardless of intellectual acuity or disability, seem like the dumbest fucker alive. For some reason, even though we met Abner Doubledeal in Cold Harbor, he doesn't recognize us. Not very good with faces, I guess. And we're forced, through the lack of dialogue options, to pretend that we don't know who he is, even though we know exactly who he is. He's the guy we met in Cold Harbor. Who are you?
How dare you speak to me in such a... Wait. You're not one of ours, are you? Colour me intrigued. You speak to Abner Tharn, Overlord of Nibene and Chancellor of the Elder Council.
The Imperial Chancellor? What are you doing here?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you contact me? Fascinating. Are you merely a blundering local, I wonder, or something more?
I'm looking for that guy, Sai Sahan.
Are you indeed? I didn't think that Redguard has-been had a single friend left. Not in this world, at any rate. Let me give you some free advice. Forget about Sai Sahan. Even if I told you where he was, attempting a rescue would be suicidal.
Suicidal, he says, to a guy who just not only escaped Cold Harbor once, but twice, each time breaking a person out of a stupidly designed prison. I think I'm gonna be just fine, okay? Especially with this combat. The NPCs, they say shit like this all the time. They try to up the stakes by talking about missions like they're suicidal, but the game's combat is not challenging. So when they say things like this, it doesn't mean anything to the player. It doesn't get them amped up or excited to play the next mission, which is the obvious goal. It just makes the player want to skip the dialogue. That's why the difficulty of this game sort of lets me down. I want it to be true. I want this to be a suicidal mission. I want boss fights to be difficult and require not just patience out of me, but skill. So I feel like I did something that shouldn't have been possible. Like the NPCs have been telling me this whole time. So when they congratulate me on a job well done, I want it to actually feel like I've earned that praise. So I return to the prophet, deliver the orb that I picked up in the underground cave, and he tells me to fuck off again so he can locate Sai-Sahan, only to call me before I get to town and tell me to walk all the way back. This guy's getting on my goddamn nerves!
Come to the harborage. We have an unexpected guest who demands your presence.
Okay, bitch. You know, maybe you could have just, like, I don't know, let me do the mission straight up without having me walk away from the place I need to go to every time. I don't know, call me crazy, but that would have been nice. When we get to the harborage, I meet Abner Doubledeal again, and he tells me that he knows the location of Sai-Sahan and is willing to help us find him. Apparently, whatever Mannimarco has planned for the world would end in the destruction of not just the Empire, but the entire world of Nirn. And I gotta ask, why are villains in these melodramatic games always interested in destroying the world? I mean, don't you live in the world, motherfucker? Wouldn't that, like, I don't know, destroy you too? But I find out later that Mannimarco has plans to undermine the God of Schemes, and the God of Schemes is too stupid to see it coming. So I head back to Cold Harbor to rescue Sai-Sahan, and I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but I've done 4 main story missions, and 3 of those missions have had the same objective: break a dude out of prison. Except I'm not breaking out Sai-Sahan. I need to rescue Abner Tharn first, which means, that's right, 4 out of the 5 missions that I've done will be breaking a guy out of prison. So I go to Cold Harbor, and once again I meet Cadwell. Cadwell is going to help me get into the prison again, but first I need to break him out of captivity. Then this happens. Oh, this guy got some hit points. Look out. Guy got some hit points. You know what, just to be, like, challenging, I'm gonna use my weapon. Just as a challenge. He can go right through walls, man. That's pretty cool. Good for him. And now he's on the other side of the fucking wall. Actually, he is stuck in the wall. Oh no, he's there, okay. Cool. Very cool. Wouldn't be an Elder Scrolls game without some bugs, right?
I see. A rescue, is it? Well, that's a different kettle of fish, isn't it? There is a cistern that drains into the waterway. The door is locked, but that's not stopped me before. Why don't you meet me there and we'll see what's what?
So I head over to the cistern, fight some fodder enemies, and come to a rather nice looking pool of water. The level design of these places is rather straightforward. If level design were a spectrum, at one side of the spectrum you have Elder Scrolls or Fallout dungeons, and somewhere in the middle you'd have Thief games, and way down at the other end of the spectrum would be games like Dark Souls. In terms of explorability, there's not much to the Elder Scrolls games dungeon design. It's usually a linear track through a rather simple dungeon layout, whereas a game like Thief would have many side areas to explore and dangers to brave for the hope of finding some loot to sell, whereas Dark Souls has whole large expansive levels hidden behind 2 secret walls. So the only thing to really do in an Elder Scrolls Online dungeon is just go in a straight line, turn occasionally, and do the objective, which I guess sort of simplifies things for your average player, but for your hardcore dungeon crawling enthusiast, there's not much here to discover or see, which I find to be rather disappointing in a game with an Elder Scrolls name. You know what I mean? Because that's why I play these games. So I find Cadwell, and he sets up a series of events that, in a game with difficult combat, would be quite enjoyable. See, Cadwell needs to fiddle around with some pipes and divert steam to open doors, which means I'm going to need to survive a wave of enemies before each door will open. And it's an interesting event that breaks up the monotony of constant enemy murdering and straight line traversal. but because the enemies aren't able to muster a defense against my spammable abilities, the event has no teeth and therefore has no impact. The game is so linear that, well, I'll let this clip speak for itself. Yes, just hit it with a hammer. That'll work. I guess I have to talk to somebody before I can open the fucking door. The game won't even let me skip the useless dialogue between myself and Cadwell. The only point to this dialogue is to find out where Mannimarco and Abner is, but the real reason is because I convinced Cadwell to leave Oblivion and come to Nirn with me. So to make sure all those events happen, the game locks the door and prevents me from making progress until I talk to Cadwell. It's not a big deal, it just felt really strange to have in an RPG. Once I kill a couple of fodder enemies, I'm met by a vision of Abner. He tells me that the door ahead is sealed and that only Atronox can get through the barrier. Luckily, I just so happen to have access to all the fleshy parts I need to make one, and this, like the previous quest, is here to slightly hinder my progress, but more importantly, break up the monotony. And I'm gonna admit that this game does do a good job of that. I was never overly bored by the objectives, I was just more bored of the combat, if anything. After a bunch of fodder enemies lose their life, I finally meet Abner in the flesh. He tells me that Mannimarco is supposed to be serving Molag Bal, but instead, he's secretly plotting to use the Amulet of Kings to absorb Molag Bal's power and use it for himself. In other words, replace the Daedric Prince. And wouldn't you know it, just as we're about to escape with this knowledge, Mannimarco pops up out of nowhere and ruins the surprise party we had planned for him. I have what could loosely be considered a boss battle. I don't know. None of these big fights ever feel like boss battles. And this same formula for the quests in the main storyline goes on like this for quite a while. Basically what happens is, every time you think you're done with something, Mannimarco pops up and says, "Nuh-uh, you're not done yet," and you have a little fight, and then you move on to the next thing. You teleport back, get told to wait by the prophet, walk out, get told to come back, get told by Abner that he does in fact not know where Sai Sahan is, and that we need to go out and find some clues in a place called Knifeir Grotto, which sounds like a racist name for an elf. This requires you to take a boat to another port and walk clear across the map and into a delve, which is like a public dungeon that more closely resembles the single-player dungeons in Skyrim. These maps often have square loops that circle around into itself, about 4 or 5 loops, and at the end of the dungeon, you usually interact with a button that spits you out to the beginning of the delve. So I head in, collect the multiple objective markers, get some exposition, and I have, yet again, I have no idea why these tablets exist. You interact with them, and they show you an image of Sai Sahan, just like the one we saw in that room way back at the beginning of the game. And again, why do these things exist? It's like foiling the plans of the big bad by finding his fucking journal. Who the hell keeps a record of a random prisoner, and better yet, why would he record conversations where he didn't get the information he was looking for, and then spread them around a dungeon? Are they for his followers? If so, what benefit do they get by watching and listening to these things, aside from learning about you, the leader of the cult, Mannimarco's failures? I know this sounds like a nitpick, but is it really? Is it a nitpick when the idea of the mission you're doing has no logical reason for even existing? The other entry is more like a journal, if anything. It serves no purpose other than to tell us what the big bad has planned. And it reminds me of that trope in movies where the hero's been captured and the main villain proceeds to tell the hero all about his plans and therefore how to foil those plans. Whereas if he had kept his mouth shut, the hero might have had no clue how to stop him. That is this game's version of that. What purpose does this serve to the members of the Worm Cult?
Chim El Adabar, the amulet of the kings of glory, an artifact of the divines, a badge of office for the ruling emperors of Cyrodiil, and the key to my ascendancy. Yet it eludes me. Exploiting its power to bring about the calamity of our age was intoxicating. It made me aware of the limitless possibilities available to one strong enough and fearless enough to use it to achieve his own ends.
All of the worm cult likely know that they're supposed to be looking for the amulet, and that's all they need to know. What purpose does telling peons what your plans beyond finding the amulet are if you run the risk of having your plans exposed to people who are trying to stop you? It's sloppy, and this guy is the one who's trying to outwit the Daedric Prince's schemes. Good fucking luck! The next stone tells us the precise location of Sai-Sahan, and our next mission is to go back to Oblivion to save him. Before we do any of that, I just realized something. These worm cult people, they're also Daedra. Daedra who work for Molag Bal. So why would Mannimarco give them tablets that they could watch that would tell them that he fully intends on fucking over Molag Bal? My fucking brain is gonna break. But now back to Sai-Sahan. Every time we come close to breaking Sai-Sahan free, he's teleported away. The second attempt sees him living out his fantasy, which is to do the nasty with the Nordic princess Lyris. Lyris turns out to be a doppelganger, of course. We kill her, and Sai is teleported away once again. Then we run into the Daedra, the Duchess of Anguish, who has been taunting us this entire time, being built up as the big bad of this dungeon, and instead of being a challenge, she goes down like an Instagram model when the nudes are no longer bringing in the OnlyFans subscriptions. Wow, the Duchess of Anguish was really difficult, man. So we return Sai to the Prophet, and Sai requires a few minutes to get over mentally all that torture he endured. I mean, a guy can only come so many times before he needs to take a break and drink some orange juice, you know what I mean? After leaving and coming back, we're teleported to the Valley of Blades, which is the location of the ring that is used to open up the secret chamber where the Amulet of Kings is hidden. So I go to the Getting Place and find out that the entire place, which is made of stone, was set on fire and attacked. So, even though Sai never gave up the location of any of the MacGuffins to anybody, Mannimarco and his people not only beat us to the place, but killed everyone before we could get there. So anyway, one survivor helps us kill some skeletons and grab the ring, but not before Mannimarco shows up demanding it.
Give me the ring, and I might spare your...
Give me your ring!
We struck down your Titan and we'll strike you down soon enough.
The Titan was a prelude of what's to come if you continue to defy me.
Defy you? Your delusions of godhood are laughable, you ignominious corpse herder.
Very well then. I'll simply take the ring from your corpses.
Now that I have the ring, the next step is to go to the place that Sai-Sahan hid the amulet, and that place is called Sancre Tor. And when we get there, who do you think is waiting there for us? Jesus? Santa Claus? Santa Jesus? No, it's Mannimarco!
What brings you to Sancre Tor, old friend? Looking for an amulet, perhaps?
Mannimarco, how did you find this place?
Do you really think I'd allow you to escape the halls of torment if I couldn't track your every movement?
Turns out that letting Sai-Sahan free was all a part of his plan. See, he tried to kill us all these times, not because he was trying to kill us, but because it was all a part of his plan. You know, in that previous mission, he sent that Titan after us. Now look at this guy. Look at the size of this guy. See how big and scary he is? Now, regardless of how easy he was to kill, what if he managed to kill me? Or not me, of course, because I'm immortal. But what if he killed Sai-Sahan? That would mean the entire goal of finding the Amulet of Kings would be ruined. Once again, this game introduces a plot hole, but this time it attempts to cover it up with the thinnest layer of caulk and is like, yeah, Sai, I let you go because I hacked your phone's GPS and I've been tracking you this entire time. Even though it makes no sense that he keeps revealing himself at every friggin' stage, actively trying to prevent us from leading him to the very thing he's looking for. You get what I'm saying here? Explaining how something is happening does not explain why it's happening. There needs to be some internal logic other than the mission would be boring if it didn't have combat, okay? I'll put it this way. If Mannimarco didn't reveal himself and just tracked us silently, then he could have ambushed us after we got the amulet, and instead, we get this genius piece of dialogue.
Mannimarco, stop! You're killing him!
Where is the Amulet of Kings? My master, Moloch Ball, demands it.
Your master, please. You would use the amulet to betray Moloch Ball.
Fool! When I ascended, you could have been at my right hand, Tharn. Instead, you chose to align yourself with mongrels and imbeciles. Now, you'll die with them.
You won't get away with this. Do you really think you can betray a Daedric prince?
With the Amulet of Kings, all things are possible. Nations will tremble and bow before me. I will be a god!
The Amulet of Kings will never be yours. It is protected by a ward of the Divines.
You mean your ward of Stendar, god of merciful forbearance, patron of gutless, law-abiding dimwits? It won't even slow me down.
So let me break this down. Once again, Mannimarco risks killing Sai-Sahan by torturing him again.
Mannimarco, stop! You're killing him!
Even though that didn't work previously, and when Sai says he won't make it past the wards, Manniboy says the specific name of the god those wards are from.
You mean your ward of Stendar?
And claims that they won't slow him down.
It won't even slow me down.
So that means that he's already been here, because he already knows about the wards, and even knows what kinds of wards they are. So if he's tracking me, why does it always seem like he gets to the place that I'm going before I get there myself? Does it turn out that Mannimarco has his own form of prism and is stealing the metadata off our phones and listening to our conversations and stealing our dick pics? This asshole must be stopped. Then we go a little further and we run into Marco Polo one more time. I want to point out one piece of dialogue here because it will become important later.
Persistent, aren't you? Do you really think you can keep me from acquiring the
Amulet of Kings is under the protection of Stendar's ward. It will never be yours.
Sai, you still don't understand, do you? My plan will succeed because of your ward of Stendar. It will prevent Moloch Ball from observing or interfering.
So Manny is convinced that the ward will conceal him from Molag Ball's eyes. And then he proceeds to tell us shit we already know, because apparently this guy has told his plan to everyone and he just can't help himself. Not to mention that this dumbass must not know that he's on the other side of the ward right now. I mean, he just got done saying that the wards will protect him from Molag Ball seeing his plan, and then, while not under the protection of the wards, proceeds to tell us and Molag Ball his entire plan. What is this fucking guy, stupid? I want to point out that he has no reason to tell us his plans. In fact, he has every reason to keep his plans a secret. He's committed the cardinal sin of bad guys. He got caught monologuing. But remember when he said the ward of Stendar will shield him from the eyes of Molag Ball?
My plan will succeed because of your ward of Stendar. It will prevent Molag Ball from observing or interfering.
Well, Sai said earlier that the ring will let us pass through the ward without taking it down.
Mannimarco may be powerful enough to break through Stendar's ward eventually. If we can get to the shrines quickly and receive Stendar's blessing, we can pass through the ward, but leave it in place. He may not be able to follow for some time.
Which means that Mannimarco will actually have to take down the ward to pass through it, which means it won't shield him from the eyes of Molag Ball, and he'd have known that. So instead of trailing behind us, because he needed time to take down the ward after we passed through it, when I opened the door using the ring, guess who's there waiting for us? You guessed it, the guy who couldn't have possibly gotten in there before us. And because we took down that ward, guess who comes to swallow his ass up after we kill him.
Thou witness my true power. Watch as I rise up from the grave and ascend to godhood.
Whoa! You think you can betray the Lord of brutality and domination without consequence? You will pay for your arrogance. You will writhe in agony for the rest of eternity. Your tortured screams will echo throughout oblivion to serve as a warning to others.
That's right. The guy he said couldn't watch him through the wards. The reason I bring this up is because of one of the many inconsistencies in this part of the story. When I came to this warded door, the ward was still up, which means Mannimarco couldn't have been inside. But since he was, I can only imagine that he waited for me to pass through the door and teleported his ass inside. Remember when Sai said that he would be able to pass through the ward while keeping it up? Well, look at this scene. Well, which is it, Sai? Are we passing through the ward or are we destroying the ward?
Stand in the casting circle and direct the ring of the doors to lift the ward.
Oh, so now we're lifting the ward. I thought we were passing through it so Mannimarco wouldn't be able to follow us through. The writing of this story in this game is so messy that characters contradict themselves like this all of the time. Because if we didn't lift the ward, how did Mannimarco beat us inside? And if we didn't lift the ward, how would Molag Bal come to swallow up Mannimarco at the end? See, the game contradicts itself, so the events that make no sense can happen even though the game just got done saying those events couldn't happen. The internal logic is totally fucking missing. Then we head back to the Prophet, and he says that we need to rest before we could do any more missions, and then says, JK, just come back and let's do some missions. Then we find out from Abner that the Amulet of Kings needs to be plugged into the wall and recharged, and in order to do that, we need to sacrifice one of our companions. And, oh man, let me tell you, what a hard choice. Do I pick the lady with daddy issues, the shirtless guy I know nothing about, or the useless old man who caused all this shit to happen in the first place? But here's where shit gets a little weird. We're told to go get some rest, and I head back to town expecting the Prophet to show up and tell me to come back, but that's not what happens this time. A guy, just a random guy I've never met before, shows up and tells me he has an important quest for me. Now, I ignored this guy at first because the icon he had over his head was not the same as the main story's quest. So I figured there was no point in doing this shit because I was trying to stick to the main story as closely as possible, you know, for the video. So instead, I decided to wait to be contacted by the Prophet. Once I realized this wasn't going to happen, I figured it must be because of my level. Maybe I needed to gain some levels before I could talk to him again, so I decided to do some random dungeons to power level a bit, and let's talk about that because this is by far my favorite part of the game. But like everything in this game, it comes with some problems all its own. First off, the dungeons are large, sprawling locations that usually have many side areas to explore and things to loot and monsters to kill, and that would be great, but you won't really be getting to see any of that because the name of the game when it comes to dungeons is efficiency. You will be running through these dungeons at a breakneck pace, barely able to loot the corpses you leave behind because the leader of your group isn't going to be stopping to check if everyone's ready, and he doesn't really need to because unlike dungeons in, say, WoW, you can solo most encounters, and if your build is good enough, you can solo the bosses as well. But here's the thing, this is where the challenge is. Soloing bosses in dungeons can be very difficult due to the mechanics that some of them utilize and the insane damage that some of them can do. So if you want a challenge, this is where many people go to fulfill that power fantasy, to take down something that usually takes a group to take down all by yourself. I love this part of the game, and this is when all the min-maxing comes in, because the normal dungeons can be fairly difficult for a player of moderate skill to solo. But once you get good at the game and learn the boss's patterns, there's another level of difficulty to the dungeons called veteran difficulty. But to do these dungeons, it helps if you have the best gear that you can get and you have a fairly high champion level. Champion levels are gained by leveling up the character past the max character level, and they add some small bonuses to your character based on 3 different trees. I won't go into them in too much depth. Suffice to say, when doing solo content, every little bit of extra strength you get matters. And what matters the most are the skills that you pick. And this is where shit gets complicated, but also unique, because there aren't too many games, at least that I've seen, that reward you for participating in side content like this game does. So I have a Dragon Knight all maxed out, I have fairly decent gear, nothing special, and I managed to get a few skills maxed out. I looked up a solo build for my character, only to find out that in order to make the build work, I needed to engage with content that I had never engaged with before. For instance, the Assault skill line, skills from all 3 of my class skill lines, and while I was picking these skills, I had no idea why I was picking the ones I was picking. The passives made sense, increase your damage and your tanking and healing ability, I get it. You want to stay alive and kill quickly, that makes sense. But the skills, not so much. See, up to now, I had never had to use any of my defensive abilities because the enemies weren't difficult. Not even the bosses posed much of a challenge. So even with all this time invested into the game, I still didn't know the when or why of using defensive and healing abilities. But in order to get good at soloing dungeons, which I was very keen on doing, I needed to learn when to use certain abilities and when not to use others, when to spend my resources and when to conserve them. That's when the depth of the game really started to open up. I realized that there were real tangible rewards for doing side content in the form of guild quests, because those guilds open up new skill lines which, for the 4 or 5 the line offers, you might find one skill that goes really well with your build. See, this is what I mean when I say the casual difficulty of the game's quests hampers the enjoyment of the game. It's not just about wanting to be challenged by the game, it's about breaking out of one's comfort zone and being forced to explore parts of the game you might be hesitant to explore otherwise. It's utilitarian in ways that I don't think a lot of designers understand. Or should I say, the guys at the top who tell the designers what to do don't understand. All of this is to say, I really like the dungeons, and I wish there was a veteran difficulty for the main story and side quests as well. After doing a few dungeons, I started to realize that the Prophet, he just wasn't going to show up and that he had ghosted me. So since I had this quest from Venice Galarian, I figured I might as well go talk to him and do his quest. And you won't believe this, but he's the continuation of the main story quest. Even though his quest marker is the same as every other side quest that I'd ever seen, he's the guy you need to talk to in order to continue the main story. What a coincidence, I thought to myself. And I have to say, this quest was actually pretty cool, probably the highlight of the game. You start off by bringing the leaders of each faction of the Alliance War together to propose a temporary ceasefire to unite against Molag Bal. Your meeting is interrupted by an attack, so you decided instead of waiting for a gigantic army to coalesce, you just decide to bum rush the Daedric Prince and assault Cold Harbor directly with just you and a handful of others, which sort of calls into question why you needed an army in the first place if it was even possible to accomplish your goals with a small team. So we head to Cold Harbor, find a city in the middle of Oblivion, and meet not Meridia, I mean the groundskeeper. There was, long ago, a city devoted to Meridia, and Molag Bal's jealous ass sent a bunch of his minions to attack it. Many people died in these attacks, so they prayed to Meridia to help them, and according to not Meridia, actual Meridia answered their prayers, and instead of helping the town, she did the worst possible thing she could have done to those poor people whose only crime was worshipping her. Apparently, the Lady of Light, the Prince of Life, Meridia, thought it would be a good idea to transport an entire town full of innocent people to Oblivion so that she would have a foothold in Molag Bal's domain. So instead of teleporting the town somewhere safe or evacuating the town before teleporting it, she teleported the town and all of its inhabitants to a place where they would literally be surrounded by Molag Bal's servants. Everyone in the city was scattered, imprisoned, or kill. Now the town is empty, but at least Meridia got what she wanted. Wow. Meridia is kind of a stupid bitch, isn't she? Do you see what I'm talking about when it comes to the writing? There's no logic to it. And then she says this.
Still, Meridia had accomplished the impossible. She stabbed a dagger into Molag Bal's side. A portion of her realm was in his domain, and he could not touch it.
Wait, so if he could not touch the town, how did everyone die and get teleported out of the town to different locations?
The survivors lost faith, however. One by one, they left the safe confines of the city to try to return to Nirn. They were foolish, and they paid the price for rejecting Meridia's edicts.
Oh, so now the game states that the people had lost faith and wandered outside the city and died because they didn't like being trapped in hell anymore and looked for an escape. So Meridia traps these people here for no other reason than they happen to ask her for help, which this is arguably not helping, and because they didn't want to be in hell anymore, Meridia let them all die. So what was the point in transporting these people here if you were just gonna let them die anyway? Like, what was the fucking plan here? To stab a dagger in Molag Bal's side? It seems to me like Molag Bal has the upper hand in this exchange. So after all that, you are tasked with 2 missions. Save the Ayleid King and save Venice Galarian. And these missions are pretty cool. To find the king, you must first find the Fighters Guild, and to do that, you have to search for clues and follow those clues through the woods. Let's see, examine. Let's see, which way is it going? This way? All right. Could just follow the waypoint, I guess. Like, the waypoints undermine the design of this mission. Okay, we're going this way now. It's funny, they place these blades in a specific direction, but then they also put waypoints for you to follow. It's like, why is the point of even, like, doing all that extra work? You eventually find the last surviving member, which then leads you to the castle where the Ayleid King is being held captive. It's a cool mission because there's intrigue.
We never made a deal with the Daedric Prince. But ever since we got here, the Wood Elves raid our nests and slaughter our children. This cycle of murder needs to end.
Look at the way her fucking mouth moves when she talks. Like, if she's gonna be enunciating P's and shit like that, you'd think they'd give her some fucking lips.
You are a hero. You stride through Cold Harbor with confidence. And
you meet some people and non-people in the woods who both say they'll help you, but you can't be sure which one actually wants to help you and which one is actively lying to you. Then you get a mission where if you're good at stealth, you can actually avoid deaths and be rewarded for it. It's pretty good stuff. Then you get to the king and you get treated to an annoying puzzle. It's not annoying because it's hard, it's annoying because every time you turn one of these crystals, you have to wait a predetermined amount of time before you can turn it again, and it makes the puzzle feel like it takes forever. Finding Venice is also a pretty cool mission. To escape being used up by Molag Bal to power some equipment in his Gimp chamber, Venice has split up his various essences into different parts of the dungeon. I could sit here all day and talk about how this doesn't make sense, but this was actually a fun mission, and I can forgive a fun mission for having some concepts that don't make logical sense. Then once you got him reunited with his essences, you have to break the shackle, which is just another word for a portal to Nirn, and you do that by traversing a bunch of dungeons, killing fodder enemies until you arrive at the place where Venice does the thing.
Keep them off me. I have to concentrate, and even the least distraction can be disastrous.
That's what I tell my wife when we're having sex. I have to concentrate or it's going to be disastrous. So it's established early on that destroying the shackle will destroy the connection to Nirn, and thus foil the plans of the Daedric Prince's schemes. But we find out that destroying the shackle creates a planar vortex that will suck Nirn right into oblivion.
The plane meld is no more! Jolly good, and as soon as you deal with the planar vortex, everything will be right as rain.
What? Explain yourself, man. What planar vortex?
The shackle formed a planar vortex, kind of like an oblivion straw that will suck Nern right through and into Cold Harbor. Quite amazing how I knew that.
So my question is, why didn't the God of Schemes blow up his own shackle then? Seems like it would accomplish the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, the characters in the story make it sound like the plane meld is going to happen faster now that the shackle is blown up. So Molag Bal has a vested interest in seeing it blown up. In other words, he has a motive to blow up his own shackle to usher in the apocalypse sooner. In fact, if he had done it sooner, he would have succeeded and we wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. There's far too many holes in this plot, and it's messed up because a lot of people probably think this was all a part of Molag Bal's plan. But my question is, if he wanted the player to blow up the shackle, why didn't he just save himself the trouble and do it himself? It doesn't make any sense. So we have a meeting where all the people we just saved argue about what to do next, and it's decided that we should charge into the heart of Molag Bal's realm, have a boss fight with a spider lady, and kill many fodder enemies, and eventually end up facing off with Molag Bal. Getting there is quite involved. The mission overall is pretty good. It varies things up by having multiple objectives and a varying array of locations, and it introduces new characters to liven things up. It's overall fun because it's constantly changing things, and that's a thing that this game's story does a lot. The missions, at least the main story missions, are never a straightforward affair. The game does a really good job of switching up objectives so that it never gets boring, but if there's a primary weakness to all this, it is the story. It's near the end of this adventure that Not Meridia shows up and reveals that she is, in fact, Meridia, and she's gonna help you destroy some dark anchors. Then we get to see Molag Bal in the flesh, but we don't get to fight him. Not yet, at least. We do some stuff with some crystals, fight Molag Bal's elite soldiers, and get saved by Meridia and sent back to town. Meridia informs me that I am the chosen one, and blah 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 blah, you know the rest. Then after all that shit, you might be thinking that with the plane meld at an end, that Molag Bal's plans are destroyed and that be the end of the main story. But then the prophet shows up, and I was like, oh yeah, you exist. I kind of forgot all about that plot thread. He wants to see me back at his cave as soon as possible, so I run my ass over there. The prophet tells me that I need to sacrifice one of the companions to power the Amulet of Kings, so it can imbue me with the power to kill Molag Bal. And I guess this is supposed to be a difficult choice, but guess what? It's not. I choose you, old man, not because you're old and near the end of your life anyway, but because you're useless. You do nothing. You act as a mission terminal. So sorry, you die. So we go back to Cold Harbor to do some more straight line dungeon delving, and eventually we come to Mannimarco, and the game gives you a choice here. You can either set him free or leave him to rot.
Come to close my torment. What is your appearance here a part of it?
A little column A, a little column B. You can either set him free or leave him to rot. I left him there to rot because fuck that guy. Then we come to the sacrificial circle, and I know Varen was probably hoping I would like change my mind on the way there, but nah, you gotta die, old man.
Position yourself over there, Vestige, and brace yourself.
We'll never forget you, sire. Or your sacrifice.
I've already forgotten him.
Great Akatosh, dragon god of time, forgive me for my hubris.
Let this noble sacrifice be a testament to our desire to set things right and restore balance to the Mundus. Your champion stands ready. Accept this offering and imbue this...
This shit sounds really painful. God damn, this shit sounded painful, man. Like he was in a lot of fucking pain before he died. So from here, now that you are imbued with the power of the gods, you one-shot everything you come across and Kamehameha your way through walls. Then we come to the boss fight with Molag Bal, and he grabs you up and tries squeezing us to death. Okay. Kamehameha! Dude, did I just beat Molag Bal with a QuickTime event? And just when you think you've killed him, a smaller, inferior version of him appears, and you have a boss fight with him, and it goes about how you'd expect it to go. He dies without actually putting up a fight, and is in fact a very disappointing boss battle. And that's it. You kill Molag Bal. That's right. You killed a Daedric prince without even breaking a fucking sweat. I don't know how this is supposed to feel satisfying for anybody. I mean, even a casual gamer. How is this supposed to feel satisfying in any way? I just don't get it. Then his spirit appears and tells you that getting killed was all a part of his plan and blah blah blah. It's fucking bullshit. You killed him, he died like a bitch, and now he's trying to retcon it like, yeah, well, I meant to die. Joke's on you. Then Meridia appears.
You are but a phantom here in my domain, Stonefire. The mortal prophecies of the scrolls have been fulfilled. Leave this place and return to your pit.
You have a powerful ally. Did you know that she would bring you here? What future role has she to play in this grand cosmic farce, I wonder?
So Molag Bal skulks away with his tail between his legs. Meridia comments on what we've done and that we've restored our soul, which is great, I guess. Turns out Abner Tharn escaped like a little bitch with the Amulet of Kings, but Meridia comments that he's going to be spending many years of his life trying to get the amulet to work, and it never will. His dreams will go unfulfilled. After all that, I am teleported back to the harborage, and we could talk with our companions, and they talk a bunch of shit about Varen, saying that they'll miss him and shit, but let's be real, they're just happy I didn't sacrifice their asses. Then you get prompted to do the silver and gold storylines, which I might do at a later time, but for now, I've had enough of the main storyline. By the time I beat the main story, I was somewhere around level 25, but I had a level 50 just sitting there waiting to be used, so I booted him up and I did what I think is the game's best content, the dungeons. The dungeons are the game's best content for a couple of reasons, but again, it gets held back a little bit, and some of it has to do with the difficulty, but some of it has to also do with the community, and it's not as straightforward as you may think. And don't think for a moment that I'm about to diss the community of this game, because they are quite possibly the nicest community in an MMO out there, and more than happy to help you. Even when you are actively fucking them over in a veteran dungeon, most people in ESO will actually take the time to point out to you what you need to do to get better, and they don't even do it in a shitty way. So by far, the community is probably the best thing about the game, but the difficulty is a different story. See, the community's only involved in this because the game expects the community to explain everything to the player instead of the game explaining it to the player. In some of the dungeons, bosses will leverage certain mechanics that make you fail the fight if you don't deal with the problems they create. For Fungal Grotto 2, for example, there is a mechanic where 4 enemies will spawn in with a boss. These mobs will pick one of your group and chain them down, and a sword slowly lowers down on them, and if it penetrates them, they insta-die. So you have to kill at least one of these guys quickly, or they will pick off your entire group one at a time. Normally a game will teach you about these mechanics through failure. You die to this a couple of times and you start trying new tactics. The problem is, you will likely run into this dungeon for the first time on normal, because everyone starts out on normal. You'll get used to steamrolling this content because you can kill everything in seconds, and chances are, you will never see this mechanic, let alone get killed by it. So what happens is, eventually, after you've gone through all the content, grinded out the levels, and got the champion levels, you'll try Event Dungeon out. The problem with that is, when I got to this point in the game, I had never even run into this mechanic and never took notice of it because we always killed the fodder enemies before they could get it off. So me and 2 other people on our team all dogpiled the boss, and one by one, we died. The leader of the group, a level 1000 vet, sighed and explained to us that we needed to kill the 4 enemies that chain us down before they pick us off. So we tried that. and our damage was so low that we couldn't even get the enemies to 7/18 of their health before they killed one of us. At that point, the leader pointed out to us that we should be doing normal dungeons until we get geared out to do vet dungeons, and all of us walked away knowing what we had done wrong. Here's the thing. Instead of the community having to do all the heavy lifting of teaching newbies, I think that the game should be teaching you how to do the dungeons properly before you step into a vet dungeon, because everyone I ask about this says that you need a good group of people to do vet dungeons, unless you are good enough and have enough champ levels and gear to do it solo. The reason I say this is because people like us, who have never done veteran dungeons, come in with a level of naivete that is quite frustrating for the actual veteran players. And I believe a lot of that problem comes from the combat never being challenging, even in a normal dungeon. Well, most normal dungeons. I mean, depending on the dungeon, you can find yourself getting eviscerated on normal. Because the combat is never challenging, chances are you never actually learn how to properly build your character or learn the mechanics of the dungeon, or learn how to actually play your build properly, and the moment you queue up for that vet dungeon, you are likely to ruin the day of any vet players that are trying to carry you through. So the players who are experienced at this game and actually know how to play end up having to play wet nurse to all us drooling water brains who come into the veteran experience unprepared because we haven't been challenged enough to learn how to play the game. So you've heard me talk a while about why some of the level of difficulty is important in a game. I don't think I've really nailed down for the why of this argument, and I think it's this. Difficulty teaches you how to be better. Through failure, we learn. If you're afraid of failure, then you will never learn how to be better, and the cycle of suck will continue. There's another way in which this content sort of gets ruined, and that's by the power levelers. This is more of a me problem than a game problem, but here's what happens. I go do a random dungeon because the first dungeon you do a day grants you a huge bonus to your EXP. The dungeon will likely be Fungal Grotto 1, almost always, because it's one of, if not the shortest dungeon in the game, which makes farming it for champ levels incredibly easy. That's the first problem I have. So that's a me problem, honestly, because I want that friggin' EXP bonus. The other problem is related to the first, and that is also a me problem, depending on how you look at it. Until recently, I did not know what the story or the point of any of these dungeons I was doing was, because the name of the game in random pug dungeons is to run as fast as you can to each boss, ignoring most of the content in the dungeon, and speed run that shit as fast as you can. Which is one of the reasons why DPS is so meta in the game. DPS is super important in a dungeon because it helps you get through them quickly, but it's also important because on veteran difficulty, some of the bosses are just DPS gates where you can't really move forward until you can kill the enemy within a certain time frame. I could easily fix a lot of this by just, having friends that play the game, but the friends I did once have in the game have all moved on to other games. There is a solution to the problem, and it's actually a nice solution. I got introduced to people who aren't gods at the game through the Blackwood expansion. Companions, to be specific. Companions make it so you can solo some of the dungeons without the help of other players. So you can slow down, take in the story, explore the map at your leisure, and enjoy the experience instead of simply grinding the experience. But that takes a solo build that can do damage and heal in equal measure, and the gear to do that. But most of all, and this is probably what I like about the experience the most, it requires you to know and master the boss mechanics. I sucked at solo running initially for several reasons. Chiefly among those was the fact that I sucked at the game. And because I sucked at the game, my build also sucked. It was at this point, at this roadblock, that I decided to go out and get a build online. And still, things were not going well. I was having a rough go of it because I still didn't understand the game. I still had so many questions like, why am I slotting these skills in particular, and under what circumstances do I use these skills, and in what order? I didn't have an answer, not at the moment at least. But as I pushed on through soloing the dungeon, through death after well-earned death, I started to learn some things, and these things I will pass on to you. Firstly, and most importantly, is a mechanical skill that vet players call weaving light attacks. It's an animation canceling technique where you initiate a light attack, and as soon as the animation plays, you weave in a skill to interrupt it. The light attack will still hit, but you don't have to wait for the animation to finish to use your next skill. It's a way to maximize the DPS output for your character. The next thing I learned is the importance of not just mindlessly spamming your abilities, because you can easily get into that habit of doing this while playing the main story, and it's a really bad habit to get into. In this game, just like in Morrowind, oddly enough, your resources are very important. You have two ability resources, Magicka and Stamina. It's important that you don't let your resources get below a certain threshold, because if you have to dodge or bash someone out of an attack and you end up running out of stamina, you're gonna die, because what I've noticed, on my build at least, my spammable attack has a damage shield that it gives me, and that damage shield keeps me alive long enough to heal up and gain back my resources. But if I spam it too much and run out, I die. So what I learned was this: do not sleep on heavy attacks. Heavy attacks are slow, wind-up attacks that do extra damage, but this isn't the highlight. They also restore your stamina. So, since I'm a stamina build, I might spam my skill a couple of times to get a good damage shield going, then I'll hold down attack to do heavies and recover my resource. Then I do damage with Magicka while I gain back my stamina. Then I slot my back bar with Magicka abilities so that if I do run out of stamina, I can still protect myself and do damage with Magicka while I gain back my stamina. I should probably clarify what a back bar is. Once your character reaches level 15, a second weapon slot will open up. You can equip a completely different weapon in that slot, and on top of that, you get a whole second row of ability slots as well associated with the weapon type you have equipped there. Which means you could have a stamina ability bar as your primary bar, and a Magicka ability bar as your second bar, and switch back and forth between them whenever one resource runs low. And the cool thing is, when you level that second weapon class up, you open up a whole host of passive abilities that could help you beef up your class. When I figured all of this out, suddenly all the abilities I had on my bar made a whole lot more sense. I knew what skills to use and under what circumstance they needed to be used, and the dungeons were no longer an exercise in frustration. Suddenly I knew how to play the game, and it was all because the difficulty of soloing a dungeon taught me how to play well through failure, and without the pressure of getting yelled at by a frustrated teammate. Finally, let's talk about item sets. Item sets are what allow you to progress your character and power levels, and it's the thing that you'll be grinding for the most. Every DLC that gets released comes with new item sets, and as such, you can imagine that there's quite a lot of item sets now. Each set requires 3 to 5 items to get the full bonus, and the last of the bonuses gives you some ultimate bonus that increases your power quite a bit. There's over 400 item sets now. That seems like a lot, until you consider the fact that there's only maybe 11 or so that are any good, and are used in any of the common builds floating around out there on the internet. The reason I'm talking about this in the dungeon section is because the two are pretty closely related. The good sets are usually found in dungeons, which is great because I love doing the dungeons. The problem comes in when you queue up for a specific dungeon instead of a random dungeon. For instance, I needed a specific set of armor in a dungeon from a DLC. The problem is, when I queue up for that dungeon, I'll be waiting anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes just to get into a dungeon. That means that, on average, I can only get 1, maybe 2 dungeon runs in on a specific dungeon per day, and only if enough people are queuing up for that specific dungeon, or they're queuing up for randoms. The main problem is with the DLCs. The fact that some of these dungeons are locked off into DLCs makes it so that the possible pool of players is so small that chances are you'll be waiting all day to get in. The problem is, when you do a run of a dungeon, you aren't guaranteed a drop that you need. I've had runs where all that dropped for me were the light and heavy armor variants of the dungeon set that I needed, and I needed the medium set instead, which means I have to go and queue up again just to get a chance of attaining maybe one piece of the armor set that I need. That means you could be grinding for weeks just to get that one set of armor that you need out of the 2 or 3 sets that you need to make your build work. If the dungeons weren't segmented off and locked behind DLC, the queue times wouldn't be so goddamn ridiculous. Maybe let the random queuers queue up for any dungeon, but don't let them queue up for specific dungeons that are part of a DLC. That way, people who actually paid for your DLC won't be punished because the pool of players queued up didn't buy it. So to close out this section, I like the dungeons because they are the one activity in the game that actually teaches you how to be a good player, because the difficulty level of the main story and side quests certainly don't do it. In this section, I'm going to go over the various activities and side content that there is to experience in ESO. Let's start this section off with PvP. PvP is something that I have never really done much of previously to making this video. I was always a solo player and therefore always had a solo build, but because PvP is such a huge part of this game, I decided that in order to really do this game any justice, I needed to at least explore the PvP. So I went to the experience with my high level toon, and well, it's alright. I mean, I'm not the type of guy to get into PvP. Sometimes I do well, sometimes I do wretchedly, and I never know why I'm so inconsistent, and I end up just getting frustrated most of the time. So I'm probably the wrong one to ask this, but the default mode of PvP, which I call default because it's the only one being rewarded for being done the most when I was writing this video, the default way is through a battleground. The Activity Finder is a feature that helps you with various activities and aids in finding groups for things like battlegrounds and dungeons. The only mode I was able to do in battlegrounds is a 3-way capture the flag mode called Capture the Relic. This is the only mode I was able to find a match on because there was an event going on that gave extra rewards for participating in the relic capturing, but there are technically 5 different modes. There's a straight up deathmatch, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's Capture the Relic, Chaos Ball, which is a mode where you pick up a ball and try to hold on to it as long as you can, and the longer you hold on to it, the more damage it does to you. So there's a risk-reward mechanic, but this is a mode that you've most likely seen in games like Unreal Tournament and Halo, so nothing really new there. There's 2 more modes, which are Crazy King and Domination. Domination is easy to describe. Have you played Call of Duty? Then you've played this mode. Crazy King, on the other hand, is sort of like Domination, where you capture a location, but that location keeps moving around the map. But here's the thing. Those modes were all removed, and now you can only play the different modes on weekend events. The only battleground queue that remains is Deathmatch, so if you were a big fan of something like Chaos Ball, well, get fucked, kid. The reason given for removing these game modes was that the population queuing for PvP was not high enough to support the game's modes, which makes sense. Alright, I guess we should get into this now. For a while, there's been a rumor going around that ESO has been bleeding players due to the High Isle and the card game that came along with it, but others have said that they're losing the hardcore PvP players, which could explain why they got rid of the game modes. Another theory is that vet players are leaving because there's not a lot of enticing things to do endgame. I think it's a combination of all these factors which are compounding and feeding into a loop of loss. Let me explain. Often I see PvP players complain about shifting metas, and that every patch seems to introduce a new meta and break other builds, and it seems that PvP players who are tired of chasing the meta have left the game. Those players then leave, and them leaving impacts whatever guilds they were a part of. Then there's the endgame players. Those players are constantly coming in and out of the game now because of the yearly content releases. Here's how it works. Players come back for the DLC, they run the new trial into the dirt, they grind out the undaunted dailies, and they do that until they get tired or they get all the gear they wanted. But as they've been queuing up for dungeons, they're noticing that it's taking longer and longer to get into a dungeon, and that turns them off. These queue times are going up because players are leaving slowly once they've done all the new content. I've had queue times of up to 15 minutes for a normal dungeon, and the wait times are even worse for vet dungeons. So what happens is, those players leave out of frustration, and that drains even more players out of the guilds. So new players coming into the game with their maxed out characters ready to do some trials can't find anyone to do trials because the guilds are empty. They start a new guild, those guilds fill up, and then eventually the player base falls off once the end game content either becomes too tedious to do or the queue times become ridiculous. Then there's the fact that PvP has not gotten any new, significant content in 5 years. Yes, you heard me. 5 years! They've released balance patches, which are highly controversial, and they've even released performance patches, which are less controversial, except for the one that reduced groups from 24 players to 12 players in Cyrodiil. That one was not well received, but as far as I can tell, Battlegrounds PvP has not received any new content, maps, or game modes in 5 years or more. And in fact, they've lost content due to shrinking numbers. None of this is the fault of the players who enjoy the PvP content, but because they are vocal about their displeasure, they have an ESO dev doing a stream with someone who calls them crybabies.
You have accessibility issues in PvP zones, Heftone delay, can't yeah. Wah, wah, wah. Okay, they're working on that too.
Fucking mega oof. Not a good look. And the amount of people that just assumed that she was a dev is outrageous. So the devs of ESO take the brunt of the abuse for someone's dumb fucking comment. So you don't address the concerns of the PvP players. They get called babies online. They leave. Then the queue times increase for Battlegrounds, which causes more players to leave. And instead of addressing the issues and maybe adding some PvP content, you get rid of the PvP game modes to shorten the queue times, making the PvP experience objectively worse, which causes more people to leave. That's my theory as to what's going on. I think a good way to combat this would be to have a queue for trials, so at least you could do the trials with some randos, even though that might be brutally painful. At least you get to do the end game content. But as for players leaving PvP, I honestly don't know what you can do about that, aside from continuing to shovel out content every year, because the game does nothing to keep players around. And in fact, the over monetization does everything it can to push new players away. I think eventually this game will get to that tipping point where the community is so small that maintaining the servers is no longer viable, and the game will eventually go offline. That may be a while from now, but when it does happen, man, that's going to be a sad day. Because this game is the closest thing we've seen to the entire continent of Tamriel being explorable, and they're not even done yet. It's a massive Elder Scrolls game, and when these servers finally shut down, man, I'm going to be sad. Especially for me, because despite all the shit that I've been talking, I do really love this game, and it's because I love this game that I criticize it so. Then there's the Realm type of PvP, and that has you fighting in an open world map with monsters and NPCs that you can kill to get currency that you can spend on specific gear back at camp. So it's an extraction mode kind of gameplay where you go in, get currency, and try to get out before another player steals it from you. I was unable to find groups for this kind of content, so I tried doing it solo, and it was frustrating, to say the least. I imagine this is a lot more fun in a group or as part of a guild, kind of like the World v World in Guild Wars 2, when you had like a group of 30 people running around, steamrolling all the groups that came across them, you know. And I imagine that to be its own sort of fun. Then there's the faction v faction stuff in Cyrodiil, and well, I mean, that shit's just dead. I couldn't find a single group. I couldn't even run across another player. When you look at the map for the game, it's just completely taken over by one faction, and nobody bothers to come in and try to push any of that back. It's like somebody comes in at the beginning of the season, takes over all the lands, and then nobody bothers to come in and do anything with it. So I think it's dead. Some other people can correct me in the comments if you want, but I found it impossible to find anybody who was even interested in this mode of gameplay. So in essence, it looks like the PvP has been neglected for so long that it's completely dead at this point. I mean, the battleground stuff still has stuff going on, and you could still find matches, and the queue times aren't that long, but for the rest of the content, I wasn't able to find anything. And in fact, in both of the realm type PvP game modes, I didn't even really come across another player but maybe once or twice. The rest of the content is stuff that you can find in the overworld, things like public dungeons, which are slightly expanded versions of delves with their own stories, and you can get anywhere from like 10 to 20 minutes of content out of just one dungeon. And the gimmick with these places is that you could do this with other randos that just so happen to be in the same dungeon as you. The content, however, is so easy that there's not really an incentive to group up with someone to tackle a public dungeon, and the rewards are pretty minimal. So there's not a whole lot of motivation to do these aside from a completionist mindset, I guess. Then the holidays, of course, have special events and event-specific loot and cosmetics to grind for, and man, that's really about it. The fun in this game is much like single-player games. The fun comes from just exploring the game world and finding fun things to do and seeing cool things. The environmental design in the game is top-notch, and there's always something to see, so exploration can be fun if you have the mindset that allows you to do stuff without getting a tangible reward for it. If you can let the journey be the reward, this game has a lot to show you. So there's plenty of stuff that I haven't talked about yet, because if I did, we'd be here all day. There's a glut of side content in the game, ranging from simple side quests to undaunted tasks that have you queuing up for specific dungeons to level up the undaunted skill line, and each guild-based skill line has a specific way of leveling it up. For instance, you gain Fighters Guild experience for doing Fighters Guild stuff, and you gain Undaunted experience for doing specific dungeons given to you by quest givers and Wayrest, and you gain experience in the Mages Guild by finding specific lore books scattered throughout the game, and slowly, very friggin' slowly, level up that skill line. But you can only do 3 of these Undaunted dungeons a day, so you have to wait an entire day to level that skill line up again, if I am correct. And frankly, there's a lot of this kind of thing in this game. It is obviously this game's one goal in life to get you logging in every day. It's a lifestyle game. You log in every day, play for an hour or two, and forget about it the rest of the day. There's daily rewards for just logging in. There's daily endeavors that grant you a special type of currency to be used in a crown shop to buy specific items, like special mounts, motives, shit like that. Then there's the crafting system, which requires you to check in on it every now and then to see if your research is completed. Then there's the daily pledges for Undaunted. Then there's the bonus EXP you get for doing random dungeons daily, and then daily PvP bonuses. And just in general, there's always some reward that is pulling you back into the game on a daily basis, like a mobile game, or more accurately, like a free-to-play game, which is exactly what this is. And that free-to-play model comes with a lot of drawbacks, primary of which is the predatory nature of the crown shop, which leads to baffling design decisions meant to funnel you into the shop to buy more shit. But you don't play this game because of shit like that, you play in spite of it. And if you're an Elder Scrolls fan and you've always dreamt of exploring the continent of Tamriel, well, this is the closest that you're going to get to that experience. And despite all my gripes, I do recommend this game to fans of the Elder Scrolls series, or just fans of the MMO genre. The game gets more right than it does wrong, and I hope it sticks around for a while. And this has been an exhausting rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some frickin' games.